This week in Texas politics began with the beginning of the third special session, but the hot topics in the governor's call overshadowed by some really disturbing events. Let's get to the headlines with our panel, and we'll begin first with Brian Smith with St. Edward's University. Brian, what's your headline?
As temperatures cool across Texas, Ken Paxton reminds us that revenge is best served cold.
Scott Braddock with the Quorum Report. What's your headline?
A war in the Middle East fueling a war in the Texas Republican Party.
And Connie Sweeney with the Highlander. Connie, what's your headline?
Volatile political climate raises suspicion.
A brief show of unity for Israel when the special session started didn't remove the cloud of animosity that was already festering over the Capitol dome. In many ways, it may have amplified the rift between lawmakers. The lieutenant governor getting called out for accepting a multi-million-dollar donation from a group that even he confirmed met with a Nazi sympathizer. Patrick and others responded by calling on House Speaker Dade Phelan to resign because he still believes the Attorney General, General Paxton, deserves to be impeached. On top of that, the Senate started moving legislation involving school choice, a vaccine ban, and border security. Scott, the Speaker on Monday said there needs to be some self-reflection within the state of Texas. He's talking about his own party. I certainly didn't expect this to get so ugly. Did you?
Well, it's no surprise that Lieutenant Governor Patrick and the Speaker have had a rough relationship ever since Phelan was elected Speaker. But this is taking things to a new level where you have the Speaker basically saying that the Lieutenant Governor needs to give up $3 million worth of contributions from a group that met with this well-known, at least within Republican circles, well-known white supremacist anti-Semite, this guy Nick Fuentes, who a lot of people never heard of before this week. But Republicans have certainly heard of the guy. Remember, it was about a year ago when former President Trump and the artist formerly known as Ye met with and had dinner with this guy Fuentes at Mar-a-Lago. And at that time, nationally, Republicans were calling on Trump to denounce the guy. And now you have a version of that happening here in Texas with the Speaker saying that the Lieutenant Governor should give away that money, that $3 million. And the Lieutenant Governor did denounce the guy, but he said that the Speaker was taking things to a new low and taking advantage of the war in the Middle East for the Speaker's own political gain. It's never been this bad between the two guys, but in some way, they're expected by the governor to move forward with his priorities, including school choice, as soon as the next couple of weeks. It's hard to see a path forward for those things when there's so much animosity.
Connie, what's the reaction in the Hill Country to this Nazi scandal?
Bread, butter, and the border. Those are the issues that continue to resonate here in the Hill Country. And when people think about defending Texas liberty, or they think about that pack as being basically one that supports conservative causes. And so, unfortunately, for those detractors of the lieutenant governor, for individuals or the media who some on the left believe are really strongly pushing this narrative, there may be concerns about whether or not that is politically motivated. And it's raising skepticism among the conservatives out here.
Brian, give me a historical perspective on this. Is this comparative to Sam Houston and the mob during the days of the pre-Civil War, or what is this?
This is Bernie Madoff and Harvey Weinstein revisited. Madoff and Weinstein were big Democratic donors. When they got caught, Democrats, a lot of times being egged on by Republicans, said, you got to return this money. And most did. We're seeing this again now, but now the shoe's on the other foot. Republicans called for Democrats to return this money. Now the lieutenant governor has to look in the mirror and say, this money is not the kind of money I want to accept.
This Nazi business is intertwined in a crazy way with the Paxton impeachment case. Some Republican lawmakers and supporters are still backing Paxton, calling for the Speaker to resign for impeaching Paxton. Connie, what are people in the Hill Country saying on this? Are they moving either way?
Rudy, it appears that even when all this controversy is brewing, people are still supportive. That is the conservative base for the Attorney General. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, he was here in Horseshoe Bay playing golf, and he's made it no secret that he's trying to support folks that are basically pushing those people that can primary some of his detractors, which would include Representative Murr. So it looks as though his wife is standing behind him, the conservative base is standing behind him, and so for those who appear to be allegedly attacking him some more, it raises suspicion about political motivation.
Scott, clearly Paxton was involved in adultery, was involved with a donor who was helping him out conceal the adultery, and then all the other things. So explain to me, how is that conservative values?
You know, when I talk to Republican groups around the state, places like Washington County, in Brenham, and down in Aransas County on the coast, these are places where former President Trump and Attorney General Paxton would enjoy huge support. Those are counties where they would win by 75 to 80% or more. There are a lot of voters who will now say within the GOP, and this is sort of new, right? They will say, we don't care if he did all that. We don't care if he cheated on his wife. We don't care if he may have, done these things that may rise to the level of criminality. We voted for him, and that's who we want. And I hear that from some voters all over the place. Now, I will add to that there are a lot of voters who in those places who don't understand fully because they haven't really heard about all of the allegations against the Attorney General. And one thing that I think has been interesting in talking with some of those voters is that when they hear that Paxton's own staff previously, going back to as early as 2018, had told him that he should not be committing adultery, that he should not be engaged in the kind of things he's been engaged in with this guy Nate Paul. When they're told that his own staff told him to get away from what he was doing, that does seem to trouble those voters. So I think it's more a question, not so much of morality with them, but I do think the argument can be made to them that it really shows poor judgment on the part of the AG to be doing this stuff.
Ken Paxton is still facing a trial on securities fraud. There's a grand jury investigation underway that is still looking at him, and yet he's doubling down, Brian, going after those who went after him. How dangerous that? That just seems really bold.
I'm not surprised by this at all. I mean, back in May, the Attorney General threatened the political consequences for those who voted to impeach him. And threats really work if you back them up. And that's what he's doing. He's going after the House managers, the speakers, legislators up for re-election because he said he would. And he's been ignoring all these other allegations because they've never really gone to trial. And until they do, this is going to be his mode of operation, going after those who went after him.
Oh, and by the way, we got a special session going on. And Governor Abbott's school choice legislation has cleared committee, cleared the Senate, and yet it's a strange package. Scott, describe this package and how does this move forward in the House?
This bill that was passed by the Senate overnight is actually smaller in scope, at least as far as how many students would be eligible. It's smaller than a bill that the governor said was too small earlier this year. That bill, back during the regular session, would have covered about 700,000 Texas kids, and the one that passed the Senate at $500 million, it's not capped at that, but that's the appropriation for right now that they're making. It would cover about 60,000 kids, what they're talking about now. Of course, it could grow. I should point that out, but it looks more and more like the governor is maybe willing to take any sort of deal he can get on this, because he's been campaigning on it during the regular session and throughout this year. He didn't campaign on it much during the campaign. Maybe that would have been the time to do it. But during the regular session and all the way up until now, he's pushed in all his chips on this issue. Of course, he's been doing his border security operations and continuing to get national attention for that. But here at the state level, he has been pushing school vouchers, education savings accounts all year, and he has not, as far as I can tell, moved the needle at all in the Texas House. I would say that the votes are probably about the same as they were during the regular session, where there's almost supermajority opposition, Republicans and Democrats, who are against taking money out of the public school system for what amounts to coupons for rich people to send their kids to private schools in Houston, Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, and elsewhere. And the governor, this past evening, last night, he said at an event that he now has moved the ball to the 1 yard line. He might ask the UT fans about that. The fact is, it's maybe not going to work out.
Connie, do people in the Hill Country realize that this isn't universal school choice, that this is a limited number of people? Do they realize what's coming?
Rudy, I think the education savings account element of it might take the sting out of it somewhat, but it's still taxpayer supported bank accounts. And even though they're trying to sell it, repackage it in such a way that maybe folks would be able to save and go, it's still going to be moving some of that public funding away from the schools that are here in our community. And the public school leaders are not supportive of that, even though there are some in the Republican Party who are very supportive of trying to get these voucher style programs out there.
Brian, this didn't make it the last time. Does it work in the House this time?
Yeah, well, one thing about the 1 yard line, maybe not UT, but as a lifelong Eagles fan, brotherly shove gets you across all the time. But to what you were saying, Rudy, Abbott can't leave the special session without an accomplishment on school choice, no matter how small. And so what he has to do is find that policy that will get through the House of Representatives and against all the people who are opposing it. The advantage of a small policy is that he can then use that as a campaign issue for his next election to say, this is something we need to build on with more money and expanded targets. This is the advantage of incremental policy over sweeping policy, because he also has to remember if he gets everything he wants, a large, expansive school choice program, and it's unsuccessful and it fails, he has to accept 100% of that blame.
The other big issues in the special session, the ban on vaccine mandates and some type of border plan. Guys, this is for all of y'all. Which one's the sleeper issue, or do they all just skate on by? Connie?
I feel like that the vaccine mandate, if it does pass, is kind of a sleeper issue, because we're still hearing some of the hints of the potential for new COVID vaccine strains to cause problems. So if you have something like a mandate that prevent some of the requirements that you'd see with personnel and employment in places like hospitals and municipalities, folks may view that as kind of a safety net, and we may not see, like we did in some of our local hospitals, the issues with the personnel problems.
Brian, what's the sleeper for you?
I don't really see a sleeper issue because the agenda is so small. There aren't a lot of opportunities for anybody to try to sneak an extra item into the 10 items or less line. Small agenda. And I think what we won't have instead of a sleeper is a failure, something that the governor wanted but doesn't get.
Sleeper or failure, Scott?
The sleeper issue is public school funding, which the Senate is moving on, even though it's not on the call as laid out by the governor. The lieutenant governor understands that there is no way for a school voucher bill of any size to pass in the Texas House without coupling that with something that puts more money into public education. The governor needs to be thinking about that. I know the speaker's thinking about that. He has said that the two things need to pass together. And so while there's all this noise about school vouchers, the sleeping giant in Texas, of course, is the public education community and their vote. In a lot of states, that's a Democratic vote. In a lot of states, you have big teachers unions and they organize those folks for Democrats. But in Texas, the teacher vote is a swing vote. And if they don't get a pay raise when you have a huge budget surplus, they're going to remember that when it's time to go to the polls next time.
This has been such a strange week with so many multifaceted things, plus the attack in Israel. So how does that issue, Scott, overshadow everything, or does it not?
Look, I think in Austin, you have lawmakers who are pretty well focused on the issues that that Texans care about, including what has happened in the Middle East. But as state policymakers, there's not a whole lot they can do about it other than say that they stand with the people of Israel, which they have done. I would say, as we started the conversation, this has really fueled this whole conversation about anti-Semitism within the Republican Party, and a moment where Republicans need to speak clearly that, as Brian has said, as you have said, folks need to speak clearly and say this is not okay. And they can do that by returning some of that campaign cash that came from a group with ties to this white nationalist anti-Semite. That is something that I think the lieutenant governor is hoping will just sort of go away, but it doesn't seem like it is, at least for right now.
This morality situation with the Republicans, Brian, the speaker said it's a line in the sand moment for him. You agree?
Well, he's fighting for his political life right now, and if he decides not to be aggressive, then the lieutenant governor and the Senate are going to run right over him.
Is this the new conservatism there, Connie? I'm hearing that people seem to be perplexed there in the Hill Country.
Oh, what I'm saying is, as from the conservative circles, unwavering support for the folks that are in their leadership. I'm not seeing anyone saying, okay, we need to get the bums out, or we have an issue here. And unfortunately, there is some media that was struggling with a credibility issue among conservatives specifically. So when you have that kind of issue, when there are reports like this that come out, they're met with skepticism, and therefore I'm not hearing folks saying, well, they believe 100% what is being said, so therefore he needs to act in this way or that way. That's just what it sounds like here.
How's the war in Israel playing out? Are people in the Hill Country paying attention to what's happening? Does this tug at them?
Yes, we have seen the usual round of Republican voices that are sending out their unwavering support for Israel. And then on another note, because of what's happening at the border, and there is sort of a view that whatever's pouring in could be everything from just the fentanyl to terrorists. So when Governor Abbott sent out that alert to everyone to be very vigilant about what's going on with regard to suspicious activities and behaviors, it only intensified some of the fears that folks in the Hill Country are having about whether or not what's happening in Israel could possibly spill over into Texas.
Let's wrap up this week in Texas politics with one word, and we'll start off with Brian. Brian, what's your word for this week?
Vouchers.
Connie, what's your word for the week?
Look out.
And Scott Braddock, your word for the week?
Blunder.
And that wraps up another week in Texas politics. Let's wrap up this week in Texas politics with one word, and we'll start off with Brian. Brian, what's your word for this week?
Vouchers.
Connie, what's your word for the week?
Look out.
And Scott Braddock, your word for the week?
Blunder.
And that wraps up another week in Texas politics.